for all the latest community news and events.
103.2 Preston FM.
Your community, your radio.
I'm here for my December chat with Mark Hendrick, MP for Preston, and we meet Mark on the 13th, Friday the 13th. So good afternoon. And are you in any way superstitious?
Not particularly, but I'm very cautious. I have to make sure I don't do anything bad today, because otherwise it will be down to Friday the 13th.
It will, so you've just got to get through till night time, and there we go. So, since we last met, I didn't realise how much happens in a month of politics till I started talking to you. As we speak, Nelson Mandela's funeral is approaching, and you were in the press as having some special memories of that first election back in the 90s.
Yeah, it was a big thing for me, because 1994 was the year I was first elected to represent Central Lancashire in the European Parliament. That election was in June, and the month before was we saw the election of Nelson Mandela, and also the death of our leader John Smith, roughly at the same time. So it was quite an emotional time, with Mandela coming to the fore and the Labour Party losing its leader. The following year I was fortunate enough to visit South Africa for the first time, meet various politicians there, see the Parliament in Cape Town and go up to Johannesburg. So it was a fantastic experience, and I came back with some really nice souvenirs. One which is an original ballot paper from that first presidential election in 1994, which I framed, and another one was like a little statuette of Nelson Mandela, which is in a sort of cartoon type image. So great affection for my time there, and obviously a lot happened since, and of course sadly he's died recently.
The response to his death, though, has been absolutely tremendous, hasn't it? The world response.
Yeah, it has, because I think in his own way he's managed to capture people's imagination in a way that few other political leaders ever did. For somebody to spend 27 years in prison and come out of that experience with no bitterness and no rancour, and then lead his country in the way that he's done, with dignity and respect for people from all different races and backgrounds, I think sets a tremendous example for the world. And I think everybody in politics, black or white, Hindu or Muslim, can look at that and say, this man was something special.
Now, on the local front, you've been speaking out in support of some people who've lost their job. Not very far from here, Goss's, 56 people are losing their job there at a very long-established Preston firm.
Well, that's right. I mean, the firm goes back many decades, and I think at its peak, this company was employing about 1,300 people. We now see the company down to just over 100 people, and another 54 people been told that they've no longer got a job. It's a tragedy for them, for their families, for their friends, and just shows the demise of that particular industry, which I feel was particularly let down through not investing in the future, not making their machines modern and digital, and the competition from abroad beginning to dominate the market that they once dominated. So it's a sad story. Any jobs lost in Preston are bad, but particularly ones in manufacturing, because it's got such a proud manufacturing history. So very bad, and as I say, my heart goes out to those who've suffered their job losses.
So is the economy strong enough for new businesses to be starting up to give these people similar jobs, or will they have to make a complete change?
Some will have to make a complete change. I came across one guy this morning who used to work at Springfields at British Nuclear Fuels, as was now Westinghouse, was given his redundancy pay and decided to set up his own little brewery, and is now running a microbrewery from Oxhay's trading estate just off Greenbanks Road, up near Plungington there, doing a fantastic job, tuning out various beers, one for the Preston Guild and another one called after the famous PNE, Preston North End. So he's promoting his beer. It's good beer. Tasted a drop this morning. And
so early in the day?
Well, just tasted. Didn't have too many other things to do. But he's running a nice little business, and obviously he's looking to grow. And his career at BNFL Springfield's finished, but he's found a new career there. Obviously, I hope those people at Goss's can do the same.
So, I mean, we have had the autumn statement, which we're not going to talk about, but is the economy supporting people who are setting up new businesses now? And are the banks supporting them in the way that they should?
Well, the banks are not, and we've heard how Royal Bank of Scotland has, given loans to companies, and now is closing down those loans purely and simply to make its balance sheet look better, irrespective of what's happening in the real economy. And banks are not lending money like they ought to. They're more concerned with recapitalising, still suffering from the financial crisis 5 years ago. And even though the government claims that the economy is improving, I'm sure it is improving in some parts of the country, particularly the south and the southeast. But I think we're still a long way from a recovery in the northwest, and here in Preston as well. And even those who are in jobs are finding they're getting a pay freeze. They're on 0 hours contracts. They're on part-time work if they can find work at all. So it's still very grim here for many people. And Goss's is just one example of, some firms that are still struggling and beginning to go under.
Now, the Preston FM listener may be wishing me to ask this question about the IPSA body, which is recommending an 11% pay rise at this time for MPs. Now, a deserved pay rise or not, is this the best time to be taking a pay rise, or have the leaders got it right?
Well, first of all, it's not leaders. If you say,
well, they're saying
political
leaders.
We're
not going to take it.
I mean, what happened was, as you well know, as a result of the expenses scandal, MPs and politicians decided that they would never again be in a position where they decide their own expenses or their own pay and conditions for the future. This was sent out to an independent body, and it's now down to that independent body to make a decision. The body has consulted with the general public 3 times now in the past couple of years, and they've come up with these conclusions. Now, the idea was that MPs accepted these conclusions, whether they liked them or not, and most of the conclusions have actually been quite negative as far as MPs are concerned. Cuts to the pension scheme, cuts to the office allowance. My office used to have 2 rooms, it's now got 1 office. Cuts right across the board, and we've accepted that, and we've took it on the chin. And now we're expected, even though we've taken everything else on the chin, when this body recommends something, to reject something that this independent body has recommended. Now, I'm not saying I agree with an 11% pay increase, I certainly don't, but I would certainly like to see maybe a smaller increase recommended. And if people really want MPs to decide this thing, then they should make MPs responsible again and let us vote on it.
Well,
if they don't want us to vote on it, then maybe they should look more closely at the recommendations that are made.
What people need to realise that this is an independent body set up, as you said, as a result of the expenses. So whatever they recommend is going to be probably a good judgment.
Or are people saying we should just accept it when it's bad for MPs and not accept it when it's good for MPs? I don't know.
So we wait and see on that one, don't we? But if we're talking about austerity, Lancashire County Council again recently announced a lot of money cuts, particularly which are going to affect care services and the transport, the roads, and so are you getting much feedback from the people of Preston about that yet?
No, because I think it takes time to kick in, but people will see this and it'll happen gradually, because we're looking at the budgets for the future, not, these cuts don't take immediate effect. You're looking forward over the next year or 2, and I will, I'm sure, get people coming to see me in the future when these cuts start to bite, because at the moment they're just figures on paper. In the future there will be noticeable cuts to people's everyday services, whether it's in care or in transport, and then they'll start to feel the pain.
I was reading an LEP article that said that, for instance, daycare, the cost of daycare, which is capped at the moment, will suddenly become uncapped and could cost an awful lot of money for people who need support from the community. Well,
that's right, and whereas these services are obviously heavily subsidised from the council tax and what we used to call the ratepayer, nowadays I think the emphasis is to put more and more of the financial burden on the service customer. And what that means, of course, is that for very poor people it becomes prohibitive. And unfortunately these services are there predominantly for poor people, because elderly people are very often poor. People with disabilities who haven't worked or can't work are quite poor. So I think a number of very vulnerable people will be at risk as a result of these cuts.
Ian Duncan-Smith has been subject to some rather aggressive interviewing this last week about universal credits, which are or are not on time and which are or are not on budget. According to Ian Duncan-Smith, they are and will be. What's your take on those?
Well, I think the whole thing has been a shambles. We know that there's pilots here in the northwest, one in Tameside in particular, and whilst they keep trying to cover up the problems with the computer system and the problems with administering the universal credit system, what is clear is that, one, it won't be rolled out on time. Two, it's going to really hit hard the amount of income that people on welfare and suffering on social security are going to receive. That will make people in a pretty poor situation even poorer. And next week I'll be visiting the food banks again at the Salvation Army in Preston, and they're telling me that, again, more and more families are now finding it hard and struggling, and people are having to come and take food from them. It's something that they don't do lightly. It's it's a great blow to people's pride that they can't feed their own families, and they don't go there because they think it's a free meal. They go there because they're in need. And it's not just people out of work, it's people on very low pay, people on part-time work who are struggling to feed their families. So it's a very serious situation. And for Ian Duncan-Smith to crow about a new system that will make people even poorer, to me, is obscene. So I think the less said about him, the better.
Now, at lunchtime today, changing the subject to schools, I heard that a free school in Crawley has been closed down because it's not coming up to standard. 2 Preston academies in special measures. What's your take on the coalition's education policy?
Well, it's a nightmare. It's ideologically driven. This idea of academies are nothing like the academies that Labour were bringing in, which were meant to try and raise standards. Very often did raise standards. And what we're seeing now is a move to so-called new academies, which Michael Gove argues is an extension of the principle, but it's not. I mean, these academies and I sat on the bill as an opposition whip, so I know exactly what I'm talking about on this. For example, parent governors are not by right allowed to sit on governing bodies. The government sees parents as interfering in the education process rather than being positive contributors. Now, parents obviously care about their children, so why shouldn't it be right for them to sit on governing bodies? Governing bodies are now obviously no longer accountable to local education authorities.
No. Yet it's still government money.
Yet it's still council taxpayers' money, and it's still government money. They're allowed to employ teachers that are not qualified to be teachers, and people will be giving jobs to friends, giving jobs to other people who don't necessarily have the right skills or qualifications to be doing that. And it's just putting children's education at risk, and things are getting far worse and not better. So I'm very sceptical and quite angry about what the government's doing, and certainly these academies, as they talk about, are nothing like the ones that we were introducing, and these free schools are just an even weirder step away from properly managed education.
From the local authority. I know, I was a teacher and I know quite a lot of teachers. Morale is very low, and Michael Wilshaw comes onto the TV yesterday saying we should be bringing back tests at 14 and criticising our standards, which are worldwide apparently very low.
Well, they are, and things have got to improve. I mean, the variation across the schools in Preston is very interesting. I won't name names, but some schools are churning out pupils with GCS 5 or more GCSEs grades A to C at over 90%. And other schools churning them out at 45%. That's a huge difference. It's a 2-to-1 difference. And you know that if your child goes to that school, the likelihood of them getting 5 A to Cs is much higher than another school. So it's becoming a bit of a lottery out there, and I think really, rather than having less local authority and government involvement in the way schools are run, I think we ought to have more to make sure that standards are maintained.
And support should be there.
Not just leave it to head teachers who are trying to run them like private schools.
Yeah. Now, we've managed to get through this so far on Friday the 13th without too much bad luck. What are your plans for the holiday season? Are they good ones?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'd be looking forward to a nice Christmas dinner with my wife, and obviously meeting with relatives and friends and celebrating like everybody else.
Lovely. Well, may we, on behalf of the listeners of Preston FM, wish you a very happy Christmas and come back 2014 fighting fit and ready to go.
Okay, well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed today's interview, why not tweet Huey at ChatCityPFM.